Right. So, welcome to whoever's watching this. I apologise in advance. Um, but this is going to be explaining what we are going to try and cover over the latter half of this year within the historic Warbird Flight. Myself and Avro, who is also with me today, but unfortunately you can't hear him, so I won't ask him to say hello. Yeah, we talked about this a while back, of setting out 3 distinct routines that everyone can memorise and learn, and then we just implement a display over the top with different aircraft. So we have the routine already set down with manoeuvres and such, but we just change the theme of the display, how many aircraft, and what aircraft we are flying. That's the basic premise of this. So we're going to be going over 2 routines to start with, and depending on how long this runs, maybe the third one, but the third one is fairly self-explanatory anyway, so I might just put a note somewhere and explain it later. So the routine we're going for, which can apply to any display within HWF, is the figure of 8, or as I came up a different name for it today, the outward bow and inward bow, which is technically 2 routines, and you put them together it becomes the figure of 8. This will all become a bit clearer once we start flying, but yes, we'll demonstrate it here. We're using standard airfields at Düsseldorf, because every air show seems to be performed here for some reason, but the premise of the routines apply to pretty much any airfield, whether it's a long runway, short runway, dirt, concrete, whatever it may be, the same premise usually applies. So we'll demonstrate that here. Now we'll be going over the primary display, which is aimed at around 5 to 8 aircraft, usually led by a bomber of some variety, with fighters escorting. For an example of a primary display we've already done, BBMF at the TNT show, D-Day Balboa at SMAS, you know, any of our main larger display would be a primary display. The secondary display is based on 2 to 4 aircraft, and is more of an aerobatic / dynamic routine, or at least that's what we're going to try and make it, with only single or twin engine fighters. So no bombers in that one, unless, you know, it's possibly a twin engine bomber of some kind. But yeah, the primary display will be focused on a couple of things. One is tight formation flying. 2 is varying aircraft types as much as we can. Some displays it's better to have similar aircraft types. Some displays it's nicer to have multiple types. And the formation flying, aircraft types, and more of the spectacle side of things. So, for example, Duxford air shows, they usually have larger formations performing alongside smaller or aerobatic teams, so yeah, they're usually classed as spectacle displays. This will be what we are doing for the primary display. I've already said the secondary display is more aerobatic focused, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So, Avro, you ready? Okay, let's go. So, while I'm taking off here, I'll just explain the bow / figure of 8 in a bit more detail. The same premise applies with every airfield, as I said, but in a specific way. You use the runway and the crowd, or where crowd centre, as your aiming point / axis to fly off. This is what real-life airshow pilots do in most cases. Some airfields kind of not limit it, but broaden where you can fly. But if for an airfield like this, for example, yeah, there is a set pattern of where you can fly. So yeah, crowd center is your main aiming point. Crowd center on this airfield is roughly where that grey square is in the centre of the airfield. What I'll do is I'll post some diagrams or some screenshots of the airfield from a helicopter, lining out crowd line, display aiming point, all those sort of things, so you can get a better understanding of it in your head. But for this, we're just going to be demonstrating the routine and give you a visual representation of where you'd be flying. So we'll go over that shortly. Right, you aboard over? Cool. Right. So we'll start off with an inwards bow. It might sound a bit confusing, but once I've explained it, it should hopefully become clear. An inward bow is where you use the runway as your axis at all times, but you tend to fly behind the crowd and use the crowd as kind of like a handle to swing past. I think that's the best way I can describe it, but we'll demonstrate that here shortly. Okay. Now, most of the air shows we've performed at recently have been relatively relaxed on the like regulations, altitudes and stuff like that. Stalag 13 was probably the most regulations based show, I'd say. And TNT was also fairly good with that as well, but yeah, it's still not exactly true to real life, which is what we try to do as best we can. So yes, first off, the inward bow. I should say this now, that any of the routines, whether it's a figure of 8, an outward bow or an inward bow, can be started from pretty much anywhere. You can, provided you stick to parameters of altitude and you know, remembering where the crowd is and where the runway is. So we are starting from crowd left. See, crowd is roughly where that grey square is in the centre. So your first pass would be a wing over pass as such, starting with the inward bow. You could be giving call-outs all the way through, and not just for the sake of being able to explain what I'm doing. Yeah. So this is the first manoeuvre of an inward bow. If you can imagine a bow tie, it has centre bit, which is roughly where that grey square is, and then the two halves of the bow on either side. So once you've done your wing over, you'll extend out a bit and then start a left hand turn back round towards the airfield. See, my turns are not going to be smooth this time because I'm just doing this to demonstrate. But when you can, if you lead a formation like this, you want to look back and remember where the airfield is at all times, so that you can judge what angle of turn you want to do. The mini-map helps quite a bit with that, top right, either be blue or red. And then once you've reached your place where you want to be, you level out. You need to give corrections if you need. But then, yes. Once you get to the end of the runway, you do another left-hand turn and repeat, and that is the inward bow. The inward bow can be done from either crowd left starting or crowd right, but it would be the same premise either way. You start going into a wing over, you bank round back towards the runway, come in for a pass, bank behind the crowd again and come in for another wing over, and rinse and repeat. Anything you want to add to that, Avro, so I can repeat it? Okay. Let's move on to the outward bow. The outward bow is essentially the same thing, apart from you never go behind the crowd. Stay in crowd view at all times. But we'll demonstrate that here. But same premise applies. It's essentially a wing over pass, sorry, an underside pass. So the crowd will be looking at the bottom, the underside of every aircraft in the formation, as the name suggests. And then coming in for a level pass and rinse and repeat. But we'll demonstrate that here shortly. When you're leading, or just in general as well, even for solo displays or duos, if you want to organise them yourself, you need to bear in mind where the crowd is, where the crowd centre is, and where the runway is. Most of the air shows we've been to haven't had clear crowd centre markers, so you kind of have to go off landmarks as best you can as well. The main landmark you have is of course the runway, so if you know where it is at all times, you should be fairly comfortable with the display. Yes, here is the outward bow. So you run in roughly at around 45 degrees to the crowd. This is a bit shallower than that, but as long as you're somewhere within this angle. Keep an eye on crowd centre, it's just off my left, about there-ish. Once you reach a certain point from the runway, you start your turn. To reach an angle you want that's comfortable. You fly fast on the bar. Once you have at around about 45 degrees away from the crowd, you level out again. Briefly, it depends on the aircraft you're flying, but sometimes you level out briefly, or go straight into the right hand turn to come in for the level pass of the bow. If you have a camera that can look round, it's always good to try and get into practice of looking round at where the airfield is to judge, judge how much turn or how much bank angle you need to put in before you level out. And then once you've reached your point, you level out. And come in for the level pass. And then same with the inward bow, once you reach the end of the runway, you extend a bit if you're in a bomber, or depending on the aircraft type is when you do the turn, and then you just do a right hand turn for this example, come back in at 45, an underside pass, and then rinse and repeat again. Anything to add, Avro? Okay. Now, this is where it gets a bit more intricate. But the figure of 8 is essentially an inward bow and an outward bow combined into one. Fairly simple to visualise in your head what that looks like. But yes. The figure of 8 is mainly where you can start from any direction, whether it's coming head on at the crowd, into a bank, so you're level with the runway. We'll demonstrate that here actually, so right here. But yeah, once you're lined up with the runway, it's essentially up to you what routine you go into. You could either go into an inward bow for starters, so you get a wing over pass, or an outward bow, so you get an underside pass. Yeah, once you're in the figure of 8, what you do is essentially up to you. If it is possible as well to switch from an inward bow to an outward bow, we'll demonstrate that here in a second. But yeah, the routine is basically the same. Once I switch into a fighter aircraft, we'll explain the next stage of that routine, which makes it a bit more aerobatic. This is flat inward bows, outward bows, and figure of eights. One we'll do next is yeah, more dynamic. But we'll get to that shortly. Now, the same. Obviously, we've flown at F3 quite a bit, or Düsseldorf. We're used to where it is. We know roughly the positions of everything, so the river, the bridges, you know, all that sort of stuff. It becomes second nature, but for a new airfield, you can basically apply the same premises and what you've learned. You just, you know, take a minute to memorize where crowd center is, memorize the runway, try and find some landmarks if you can, and then yeah, try and go into the routine. But here we will start the figure of 8. Apologies, Evo, this might be a bit sharp to the right. So once you're lined up with crowd center, once you're at a correct distance, you start your turn. You want to make it so you're exiting, flying, runway heading. Like so. Terrible camera work, there we go. And then once you're at this point, you can either start into an inward bow, like I said, which is a simple roll left, come in for a wing over, or if you wanted to do an outward bow, you roll right and come in for an underside pass. But yeah, the thing we'll get to after this wing over is how you switch from an inward bow to an outward bow, or vice versa. The simplest way to do it is probably in the level pass. It's where you fly the runway heading, and then at the end you have a crossroads in the sense of where you want to go. But if you want to do it after a wing over or an underside pass, you can, as follows. Remember, keep your eyes on crowd center. The runway is a good aiming point to use as well, is you want to start coming in at the maximum end of the runway and exit at the other maximum end, like so. Once you've done that, if you want to switch to the outward bow, you start the left hand turn, and if you wanted to get back onto the runway, you'd extend out and make it a sharpish turn, but because we're extending outwards into an outward bow, can make the turn relatively gentle. This is especially used when you're flying a heavy bomber, or when a heavy bomber is in lead formation, as yeah, they often do require larger turns to get back into form, back towards the runway. Once you're at your angle where you want to be coming in towards the crowd for an outward bow, you increase your bank a bit. Once you've reached crowd center, you start leveling out. You want to level out so you're heading directly for crowd center or close to it. And then once you're ready, you start your underside pass. And then once you're at your angle heading away, you level out. From here you can either return to a level pass, continue the same manoeuvre so you end up in another wing over, bank back right, come in for a break, or whatever you want to do. It's entirely your call as leader. Anything to add, Avro? Okay. That's basically all I wanted to cover. That is essentially the basics of every routine that we are going to do in Historic Warbird Flight from now on. It'll be either a combination of both bows, so you get figure of 8, or it'll be one bow and then the break into a tail chase, for example, or an outward bow into for a shorter display into ducks breaks to land, for example. It's quite a universal routine that can allow you to do pretty much all of what we do in Historic Warbird Flight within one display, so we shouldn't have to worry about that. Right, if you want to J out, get something faster or whatever, I'm going to do the same, and we'll move on to the more dynamic version of those routines. In a sense, it's essentially just when you come to do the turns of the bows, you can make them either tighter or going up and right or up and left. This is mainly, or the up and left mainly directed at single engine fighters, but twin engine fighters do also work as well. So trying to do the game's gonna end. No, quick. Right. Speed. What can I do? I think we're on about 300 plus, maybe 280. Apologies, getting the map set up again. Right. Okay. One thing I am going to make clear in this is, if you're in a since the secondary display is more aerodynamic focused, if you ever have an opportunity to do a level pass, you can substitute that level pass for either a loop, or possibly a victory roll, or some sort of aerobatic maneuver that can be done within a formation. We'll try and demonstrate that here, but that's how it goes. Let's go back. No, I'm at the wrong airfield. Damn it. Crap. I'm in the Mustang. Whole bugger it. I'll switch to the Typhoon. Wait. Apologies. Right. Huh, that's funny. Right. Okay. Let's get everyone here. Make sure to do this before takeoff, but changing controls. Yeah. Make sure I got some white smoke. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. So, yeah, we'll focus on making these more. Oh, sorry, too far. Yeah, that's why I wanted the Mustang, but rip. Yeah, focus of these is going to be more aerobatic manoeuvres. With the Typhoon, it's going to be kind of difficult, but yeah. A key thing you want to focus if you're leading, well, the leader anyway will try to focus on this, is keeping enough energy up so the formation doesn't stall or lose too much momentum. But as a wingman, your focus should be solely on the lead aircraft, making sure you're in formation with him at all times. We'll start this routine from a level pass, but yeah, same with the flat routines, you can basically start it from anywhere. If you're starting, or if you're wanting to do more aerobatic manoeuvres, it's kind of recommended to do, or to start the display from a diving position, or a shallow diving position, so you gain enough speed to go straight up into an up and left, or straight up into a loop, or whatever manoeuvre you want to do. So we'll try that here. So beginning climb, everyone. Get to around about 1,500 feet, 2,000 feet. And yeah, beginning routine. Okay. I'll do my best to, during manoeuvres, look back and show you exactly where you want to be, your, demonstration of where the runway is in relation to you. But oh dear. Okay, once you're in position, begin your descent. Okay. Call your smoke on, go. Now for the sake of this, we're just going to go straight up into an up and left hand turn at the end of the runway. Once you're at a nice altitude, level out. And once you're in position, easing up. Rolling left now. Holding now. Saturation. So yeah, you want to come down crowd center. Classic Spitfire problem. And then up and left again. Again, same kind of routine, except you're just making these turns at up and then at an angle back down to gain more speed to come into the next pass. This angle sets you up nicely for a victory roll. Just remember, you've got people on your wings, so you need to be careful. yeah, that was just a demonstration. You can basically substitute any maneuver in there. Loops, victory rolls. You know, if you wanted to change the formation in the turn, you can. That's one thing as well with the primary display, is changing routine. Once you exit an angle you want at a distance, you start your turn again, and you can either perform a sharp turn, so you're lining up with the runway, or a shallow one like I'm doing, and then you're set up for an inward bow, in which you just rinse and repeat. Good way to judge it is once your gun sight or the centre line of your cockpit crosses ground centre, it's when you want to start levelling out. And start your wing over at any point. Making sure you exit towards the end, or enter towards one end of the runway and exit towards the opposite end. Then you can start up again. Into an up and right. And down. Again, you don't have to line up perfectly with one way, just use it as your axis. If you're not as confident with leading, you can, you know, stay a bit further away and you still get the same effect. And then, yeah, that is essentially the same premise. The secondary display is all about adding in those more aerobatic manoeuvres to the same routine, and just done with lesser aircraft. Usually around 2 to 4 is what we aim for, whereas the primary display is around 5 to 8, possibly 9 aircraft. If we get that lucky. And yeah, anything to add, Avro? Right. So what I said there was, if you fall out of formation during one of the more aerobatic manoeuvres in the formation, try not to join up during another aerobatic manoeuvre, such as an up and left hand turn. Wait till there's a wing over or a level pass before you try to rejoin, as it just makes your life easier and it's safer for both formation, yourself and the crowd. So roughly you're getting out of it. Okay. So straight a bit further away. Okay. Right. I don't think I have anything to add. I'll just get some closing thoughts now. However, if you want to break, you can. And that's everything now. So yeah, this is what we are going to be doing in HWF from now on. Every display we do will be based on these 2 routines. Obviously they're both kind of improv to, well, not improv, but they can be moulded to any display. So BBMF we'll obviously be doing a primary display with, say, 5 aircraft, and we'll just keep it to an inward bow and then a brake and a tail chase, for example. Or if we're doing a secondary display, which is more acrobatic, with, say, 3 aircraft, we might start going into an outward bow, and then, you know, performing some aerobatic manoeuvres, and then exiting in a manoeuvre in an inward bow. You know, it's universal routines that can be moulded and shaped to fit any display with any number of aircraft, and pretty much any flying style as well. These routines as well can be done for solos. I use them quite a lot in solo routines, or my solo routines at least. It's just, making the manoeuvres smooth from one into the next is a big part of these as well. You don't want to be levelled out for too long, except in the case of primary displays, because you can be forgiven because you've got lots more aircraft. But yeah, so this PDA, well, when this was being filmed, there was a PDA due tomorrow, which would be a primary display type with multiple different aircraft. So we'll be doing flat bows and figure of eights, and brakes, of course, and then yeah, do it that way. One thing, I have a couple of other notes here as well, which I'll add on, although they're kind of not to do with this, but they're still good information anyway. This is for all pilots who watch this, and for all pilots in the squadron in general. Have pilots list off preferred aircraft for formation and aerobatic displays. This is probably 2 for each nation. Alongside that, every pilot from now on must try to grind for aircraft of rank 2 for every nation. So we have a bit more variety to work with when it comes to creating displays, because for the most part of our thing we've been flying Allied aircraft, and as much as I love flying Allied aircraft, we need to start moving away from it. Still fly them, of course, but just spice it up a bit more with more people flying Axis aircraft, some Allied aircraft, make the routines a bit more dynamic instead of just Hurricanes, Spitfires, Mustangs, etc. Not that they aren't good, but eventually even will get bored of flying them. Besides that, I don't have any other notes. This was all I wanted to do today, but please take the time to practice some of these routines on your own so you can learn them. And yeah, I think we'll end Avro with a split break if you want to, for a bit of razzle dazzle. Have we got enough map here? No. Okay, make this quick. Vixen, peel split, right, stand by, and brake, go. Nice. Alright, gentlemen, thank you for watching, and see you at the next PDA.